Chapter 1. Cracks in the facade. Looking back, the first signs were so small, so easy to dismiss. James and I had been married for 10 years, and if you'd asked anyone, we had a picture-perfect life. We had our home, nestled in a friendly neighborhood, where every family smiled and waved, and I knew everyone's children by name. People called us the golden couple, which always made me laugh, as if we were untouchable, as if our love was different. But over time, I realized that perhaps the most dangerous thing about love is the quiet confidence that it could never crumble. In the beginning, everything was perfect. James and I had our routines that made life feel steady. Mornings started with coffee together, soft conversations in the early light, jokes whispered while still sleepy. Nights were spent on the couch, watching TV shows or reading, falling asleep on each other's shoulders. In our little world, I felt safe. Then, slowly, James started changing. It was subtle, a new cologne, his sudden attention to clothes, the long silences where there used to be laughter. At first, I didn't question it. I chalked it up to work stress, even to aging. But then he began disappearing for late-night meetings that ran well past midnight, returning with vague explanations and the faintest whiff of a perfume I didn't wear. At night, lying alone in bed, questions gnawed at me, whispering doubts I didn't want to listen to. The world outside had always seemed to believe in us, but could I still believe in this marriage? In him? Author's comment. The cracks in this story aren't just in her marriage, they're in her heart. This chapter pulls us into the comfort of what once was, a life full of familiarity and security. But as readers, we're drawn to the mystery. Is she imagining things, or is James really hiding a devastating secret? It's a question that doesn't just haunt her. It makes us want to know the truth, to see just how far down this path will lead. Chapter 2. A growing doubt. At first, I tried to dismiss the thought that he might be lying. Maybe he really was working late. Maybe his change in mood was stress, a rough patch we'd get through like all couples do. But doubt began to fester, growing every time he ignored my calls or dismissed my questions. I could feel a distance between us that hadn't been there before, a kind of quiet, hollow emptiness that lingered in our conversations and even in the way he touched me. It was as though I was reaching out across a widening gulf, only to have him pull away, leaving me to wonder if I was the one who had pushed him too far. One night, he came home well after midnight, his shirt wrinkled, his tie loosened, his eyes red. He'd barely managed to smile as he mumbled something about a long day, slipping past me to shower. I stood in the hallway, watching him disappear behind the bathroom door, a mix of anger, hurt, and helplessness welling up in my chest. I wanted to scream, to demand an answer, but something kept me rooted to the spot, swallowing back my words. Maybe it was fear. Fear that I already knew the answer, fear that confronting him would make it real. I found myself going through his things, something I'd sworn I would never do. I hated myself for it, feeling like some unrecognizable, desperate version of myself. But I had to know, had to find some hint, some clue to put my mind at ease. I searched his pockets, his car, even scrolled through his phone when he left it unattended. But it was a sterile, calculated exercise. Nothing more than a few empty reassurances, a false comfort that I wasn't alone in this sinking feeling. In the end, it wasn't anything tangible that gave him away. It was the way he looked at me, as though he were a stranger, the way he avoided my eyes whenever I asked, "Is everything okay?" And every time he turned away, he left me there with that emptiness, that ache I couldn't name, yet couldn't ignore. I knew then, in my bones, that something between us had shifted, that no matter what he said, our marriage was slipping beyond my reach. Author's comment. Her growing suspicion, the doubt that creeps into every corner of her heart, is relatable. Who hasn't felt that flicker of doubt? We know she wants to believe him, but as the evidence piles up, we're drawn to watch her struggle between trust and truth. This chapter builds tension, laying a foundation that keeps us rooting for her, wanting her to find clarity in the fog. Chapter 3. Evidence in the shadows. The next day, I woke up with a new resolve. I wasn't going to let this go on, wasn't going to let my life dissolve into whispered suspicions and sleepless nights. I deserved to know the truth. With a mix of anger and determination, I started gathering evidence, piecing together every scrap of doubt that had haunted me for weeks. I began checking his phone bills, meticulously scanning each number I didn't recognize. When he wasn't around, I'd go through his emails, his calendar, every possible source of a clue. Every time I found a shred of something suspicious, an extra long call late at night, a weekend work trip that didn't add up, I felt a surge of both vindication and despair. I wanted to be wrong, to find a reasonable explanation. But deep down, I knew I was right. Days turned into weeks, and my life became a delicate balancing act of pretending and uncovering. I wore a calm mask around James, smiling when he was home, holding back my questions, acting like nothing had changed. But beneath the surface, I was unraveling, becoming someone I didn't even recognize. A woman consumed by mistrust and bitterness, someone who was watching her life from the sidelines. Then, one afternoon, I discovered another detail, a missing piece that made my worst fears tangible. He had forgotten to log out of his email on our shared computer. And there, in his sent folder, were messages to someone named Clara. I read each message in disbelief, my heart racing as I took in the familiar tenderness of his words, the plans for their next weekend getaway. It was all there, laid out in plain text, the lies, the betrayal, the other life he'd been hiding from me. I sat back, staring at the screen, numb. The truth was undeniable now, a heavy, brutal clarity settling over me. He had betrayed me, and yet, in that painful moment, I felt an eerie calm wash over me. I realized that I'd been preparing for this all along. I'd lost him long before I knew about Clara. All that remained now was a choice. Would I confront him, or would I plan my own way out, leaving on my own terms? One thing was certain. I wasn't the same woman who had blindly trusted him. No, I was someone new, someone who would no longer live in the shadows of his lies. Author's comment. With this discovery, her world begins to shift. The receipt is more than a piece of paper. It's the first physical proof that she's not imagining things. Watching her gather evidence reminds us of her strength, her quiet determination to find the truth. As readers, we feel the weight of each discovery, rooting for her to find the courage to keep going. Chapter 4. Hiring help. The first night after I received the investigator's file, I sat alone in our bedroom, surrounded by undeniable proof of James's betrayal. The photos were stark, capturing intimate glances, a hand lingering on her back, a stolen kiss in the dim light of a restaurant. The texts were worse, a parade of sweet nothings, whispered promises, plans for weekends he'd told me were business trips. Everything I'd been imagining, every doubt, every suspicion. It was all laid bare in ink and pixels, harsh and irrevocable. I wanted to cry, to scream, but no tears came. It was as if my emotions had shut down, replaced by a kind of cold fury. I realized, with a strange calm, that I was no longer the same person. I had been so trusting, so willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, to be patient and forgiving. And this was how he repaid me, with secrets and lies hidden in the corners of our life. I could confront him, of course. Part of me wanted to shove the file in his face, watch him stammer out explanations, excuses, watch him try to piece together some flimsy story about how it didn't mean anything. But somehow, that felt too easy, too fleeting. I wanted something deeper, something that would make him understand the gravity of what he'd done, the damage he'd inflicted on my heart, my trust, my belief in us. And so, I decided to wait. I kept going through the motions of our life, playing the part of the devoted wife, smiling and chatting as if nothing had changed. I went about my days, laughing with friends, keeping up my routines. But inside, I was preparing, planning. If he thought I was in the dark, that was fine. Let him believe it. I wanted him to feel as comfortable and as clueless as I had been, so that when I finally acted, the ground beneath him would collapse entirely. I quietly started making preparations. I opened a separate bank account, started setting aside funds. I listed out what I'd take with me and what I'd leave behind when the time came. I rehearsed my exit in my mind, imagining every detail, picturing the exact words I'd use when I finally decided to leave him standing alone in the wreckage of his own making. By the time I had everything in place, I felt something shift inside me, a calm, a strange peace. I didn't know exactly what lay ahead, or how hard it might be to rebuild my life from scratch. But for the first time in months, I felt powerful. I had reclaimed my story, my choices, my future, and I was ready for whatever came next. Author's comment. Hiring the investigator was her first step toward reclaiming control, and it shows us her bravery. She could have ignored it, could have let things slide, but instead, she takes action. This chapter makes us wonder what her plan will be, how she'll confront him, and whether she'll get the satisfaction she deserves. Chapter 5. Confronting him for a moment, he just sat there, frozen, his eyes fixed on the photos. I could see the panic in his gaze, the dawning realization that this was real, that he couldn't charm his way out of it. I'd seen that look so many times before, when he'd misstepped at work, when things didn't go his way. But this time, his confidence was gone, replaced by something raw and unguarded. "Please," he stammered, reaching across the table as if he could somehow erase the distance that had grown between us. I never wanted to hurt you. I thought it was harmless. It wasn't anything serious. I was just looking for excitement." I interrupted, my voice barely above a whisper, each word deliberate. "Were you just bored with our life, our marriage? I was here, James, trusting you, loving you, and you were out there, making a fool of me. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" He sat back, his face etched with shame. It felt strange, seeing him like this, vulnerable, stripped of his usual charm. Part of me wanted to feel pity for him, to remember the man I'd once loved, the man I'd shared a life with. But another part of me was stronger, a voice inside that refused to let his betrayal be anything other than what it was, a cruel, calculated decision he'd made again and again. "You've taken away everything I believed in," I continued, my voice steady. "Do you know what it's like, living every day, pretending nothing's wrong, while knowing that the person you trusted most is lying to you? I gave you my heart, my loyalty. You were my best friend, James. And now you're just a stranger who broke me." Silence hung between us, heavy and thick. He tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled away, rising from the table. I didn't want to hear his pleas, his promises to change. I knew he'd try to paint over the cracks, to patch up the pieces with empty words. But I was done. I had given him everything, and he had thrown it away. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice firm. "Don't follow me. Don't call me. I'll send for my things." I watched the realization sink in, his eyes widening as he understood that I was truly done. I turned to walk away, feeling the weight of my own strength as I left him sitting there, a broken man in an empty restaurant. For the first time in months, I felt something close to relief. I was free, unburdened, finally able to move forward with my life, one step at a time. As I left, I didn't look back. I knew that whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms. And that was a freedom he could never take from me. Author's comment. This confrontation is powerful, and it's more than just a dramatic moment. It's her taking her power back. She shows incredible strength, meeting his betrayal with dignity. We can't help but cheer for her, knowing she's taken control and wondering what her next move will be. Chapter 6. Leaving in the beginning, the silence in my new apartment felt unbearable. I'd lived with James for so long that even in his absence, I could still feel him in the corners of my mind, lingering like a shadow. I'd catch myself setting the table for two, or turning to share a thought with no one. Nights were the worst, staring at the ceiling in the quiet, trying to drown out memories of our life together, our whispered conversations in the dark. But slowly, I began to reshape the silence, to find my own rhythm. I filled the empty spaces with my own small rituals, morning coffee by the window, evening walks through my new neighborhood. I bought fresh flowers, rearranged the furniture, painted the walls a soft shade of blue. Each small change made the place feel a little more like mine. I started writing again, filling notebooks with thoughts, observations, and dreams I hadn't dared to share with anyone. I went to a yoga class, reconnected with old friends, and even signed up for a cooking workshop. It was strange at first, showing up alone, unsure of who I was without him by my side. But with each new experience, I felt a little less lost, a little more like myself. Some days were harder than others, of course. There were moments when I'd see couples laughing together, or catch a familiar scent in the air, and grief would grip me all over again. It would come in waves, sudden and unbidden, but I learned to let it pass without fighting it. I understood that healing wasn't a straight line, that there would be setbacks along the way, and that was okay. James kept calling, his messages going from apologies to pleas, sometimes even angry accusations. He wanted answers, closure, but I didn't owe him that. I had spent years of my life giving him my heart, my loyalty, and I knew now that my only obligation was to myself. I blocked his number eventually, freeing myself from the final thread that bound me to him. Over time, I began to realize that I wasn't just moving on from him. I was rediscovering the parts of myself I'd forgotten, the pieces of me I'd sacrificed for the sake of our marriage. I started setting goals, small ones at first, like reading a new book each week or trying a new recipe. Each small success felt like a victory, proof that I was capable of building a life that didn't need to be shared to be meaningful. One evening, as I sat on my tiny balcony, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, I felt a rare sense of peace. I wasn't where I thought I'd be, and my life hadn't turned out the way I'd planned. But in that moment, I knew I was exactly where I needed to be, finally free, finally whole, and ready to embrace whatever came next. Author's comment: moving on isn't easy, and she doesn't pretend it is. This chapter lets us see her vulnerability, her struggle to rebuild. We want to see her succeed, to find a new life, a new happiness that's all her own. Chapter 7. Rebuilding. As I started rebuilding my life, piece by piece, I found small joys in the freedom I hadn't expected. In art class, I felt my creativity come alive in ways I hadn't experienced in years. My brushstrokes were hesitant at first, but soon the colors flowed, reflecting emotions I hadn't let myself feel. Each session became a form of therapy, a space where I could release the pain and frustration of the past and rediscover parts of myself I'd buried. I even began to look forward to those quiet evenings, sipping tea with paint-stained hands, surrounded by canvases that reflected my journey. My friends were a lifeline, too. They welcomed me back into their lives without judgment, patiently listening when I needed to talk, and making me laugh when I didn't want to think about anything serious. I hadn't realized how much I'd let my friendships fade during my marriage, how much I'd closed myself off, trying to maintain a facade of perfection. But now, reconnecting with these friends, I felt a genuine warmth, a reminder that I was never as alone as I'd feared. Joining the book club was an unexpected joy. There was something comforting about gathering each week, discussing stories that held no connection to my own, letting myself get lost in the lives of fictional characters. For the first time in a long time, I was surrounded by people who knew me simply as me, not as someone's wife, not as part of a perfect couple. And that anonymity was a relief, a chance to be seen on my own terms. But of course, there were difficult days. Days when memories would sneak up on me, triggered by a song, a scent, a couple holding hands. I'd feel a pang of sadness for the life I thought I had, the future I'd once envisioned so clearly. On those days, I allowed myself to feel the grief, to mourn what I'd lost, but I reminded myself that clinging to the past would only keep me from the life I was building. I'd learned to welcome the sadness, to breathe through it, letting it pass through me without resistance. I knew that each wave of sorrow was temporary, just one more step in my healing. As time passed, I noticed a new resilience growing within me, a quiet strength that I hadn't known I possessed. It was in the small things: how I managed my finances independently, how I painted a whole room by myself, how I solved everyday problems without relying on anyone else. Each small accomplishment was a reminder that I was capable, that I was enough. There was a calm satisfaction in knowing I was building a life on my own terms, a life where I was in control. I'd stopped thinking of myself as the woman he left or the wife he betrayed. I was just me, finding joy, finding purpose, rediscovering my passions. I began to see my life as a blank canvas, a chance to paint a new story, one that wasn't defined by anyone else's choices or expectations. And for the first time, I felt excitement about the future, about the possibilities ahead. I was no longer looking back. I was moving forward, one step at a time, toward a life I was ready to fully embrace. Author's comment. This chapter is about her healing, her growth. She doesn't let the pain define her, but instead, she builds something new. We see her resilience, her ability to find joy again, and it gives us hope that her story is moving toward a brighter future. Chapter 8. Finding closure. When I saw him standing at my door, I felt a rush of emotions I wasn't ready for. Memories of our life together, the years of laughter and love we had once shared, all flooded back in an instant. For a brief second, I wondered if I had the strength to face him, to hear him out. But I knew I couldn't live in the shadow of those memories forever. I opened the door and invited him in, gesturing toward the small living room where we once would have felt at home together. But now, it felt like we were strangers, awkwardly perched on opposite ends of a bridge that had long since crumbled. He started talking, his voice soft, hesitant, each word weighed down by a remorse that, once upon a time, might have mattered to me. He said he was sorry, that he'd made a mistake, that he'd been careless and selfish. He told me he missed our life, missed the way we used to be. He admitted that he'd taken it all for granted, that he hadn't appreciated what he'd had until it was too late. I listened, nodding occasionally, but inside, I felt nothing but a quiet resolve. I thought I might cry or maybe feel a surge of anger, but all I felt grounded and alive. My own paintings took on a new energy. The colors were bolder, the strokes more confident. It was as though the art itself reflected the journey I was on, the transformation I was embracing. Travel became another escape, a way to push my boundaries and create new memories. I booked trips spontaneously, places I'd always dreamed of but had never gone because there'd always been something holding me back. On a whim, I went to Paris. I walked along the Seine, watched the city lights shimmer at night, tasted new foods, met strangers with stories I'd never forget. It was in those solitary moments, surrounded by a world that was new and thrilling, that I felt a sense of wholeness. Back home, I grew closer to friends who became my chosen family. We'd gather on cozy Sunday evenings, cooking dinners together, laughing over glasses of wine, sharing our dreams and fears. I realized that friendship, real friendship, was a kind of love too. It filled spaces in my life I'd once thought could only be filled by romance. I began to appreciate the way they showed up for me, how they brought warmth and understanding that asked nothing in return. Of course, there were moments when memories would still surface, a song on the radio, a familiar scent, and I'd feel a faint ache, a reminder of the life I'd left behind. But instead of resisting it, I'd learned to welcome it, like an old friend passing by, one who no longer held power over me. I understood that healing didn't mean erasing the past but finding a place for it, a way to coexist with it peacefully. One afternoon, as I stood in my little studio, finishing a painting that I had poured my soul into, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. I was grateful for every moment, even the painful ones, because they had brought me to this place. I saw strength in myself that I'd never known I had. I didn't need someone else to complete me. I was whole all on my own. Then, almost without realizing it, I began to open my heart again. Not to the idea of another relationship, but to the possibility of new experiences, new connections. I wasn't searching for anything or anyone. I'd learned that my happiness didn't depend on a partner, but was something I could cultivate within myself. Still, I was open, willing to embrace whatever life brought my way, and that in itself felt freeing. One evening, while out with friends, I met someone, a quiet, kind man who listened when I spoke, who laughed at my silly jokes, who seemed genuinely interested in my story. We exchanged numbers, and to my surprise, I found myself smiling about it on the way home, feeling a familiar but gentler flutter. I knew I wasn't rushing into anything, and I didn't feel the urgency I once might have. It was simply a spark, a pleasant feeling, a possibility that I could choose to explore or let go. For the first time in years, my life felt like it was mine alone, a canvas of my own making, filled with colors I had chosen. It was a life painted with freedom, resilience, and the quiet joy of rediscovery. Whatever the future held, I knew I was ready, not because I had someone beside me, but because I had found peace within myself. Author's comment. Watching her find happiness again is a beautiful reminder that life goes on, that healing is possible. We're rooting for her now, seeing her thrive and knowing she's truly moved on. Chapter 10. The new me. I started a new job, threw myself into it, and found a renewed sense of purpose. Every day was a chance to reinvent myself, to let go of the past and embrace the person I was becoming. My role was challenging, requiring long hours and intense focus, but for the first time in years, I welcomed the demands. Each project, each task felt like a step forward, a piece of the life I was carefully building on my own terms. My colleagues became an unexpected source of joy. They were vibrant, ambitious people who brought new perspectives, who challenged me, and who knew nothing about my past. It felt refreshing to be seen as just me. Without there was a calm detachment, like I was watching a movie of someone else's life. His words washed over me, and I realized that no apology, no amount of guilt, would ever erase the betrayal, the months of doubt, the nights I spent alone wondering if I'd lost my mind. When he finally stopped talking, he looked at me, waiting for me to respond, maybe hoping for some sign that there was still a part of me that cared, that would take him back. But I didn't know him that. I didn't know him anything. "Thank you for saying that, James," I said, my voice steady, even, "but it doesn't change anything. What's done is done. We had a life together, and for a long time, it was beautiful. But I've moved on, and I hope, for your sake, that you find a way to move on, too." He looked down, his face crumpling with a sadness that might have softened my heart once, but not anymore. This was a sadness he'd brought on himself, a pain that I no longer felt responsible for soothing. I watched him gather himself, saw him stand up to leave, and for the first time, I felt a strange sense of closure. I had been waiting for this moment without even realizing it, waiting to feel that final break between us, to know that I was truly free. As I walked him to the door, he turned back, as if to say one last thing. But he seemed to think better of it, and with a faint, defeated smile, he walked out of my life for the last time. I closed the door, leaning against it as I took a deep breath. I felt lighter, as if I'd finally let go of the last piece of him that had been weighing me down. He was a chapter one had read, learned from, and closed. And now, for the first time, I was ready to live without looking back. In the days that followed, I felt a new kind of peace settle over me. I poured myself into the life I'd been building, throwing my energy into my art, my friendships, my passions. I wasn't living to prove anything to anyone anymore, least of all to James. I was living for me. And the strangest part was, after letting go of that last thread of hope or regret, I felt a rush of freedom I hadn't known was possible. I could breathe again, move forward without the ghost of our marriage lingering in every room. I could reinvent myself, reshape my life into something I chose for myself, not out of habit or obligation. It took time, of course, and I had my moments of doubt, but each day felt like a fresh start, each morning a blank page that I could fill however I chose. I started planning things I'd put off for years, trips, projects, even silly hobbies I'd let go of when I became his wife. For the first time, I could see a future that was mine alone, untethered from the past. And maybe, just maybe, that was the greatest gift of all. Knowing that I didn't need him, didn't need anyone, to feel whole. I had found a new strength, a new voice, and as I looked ahead, I knew that the best part of my story was just beginning. Author's comment. Closure is a gift she gives herself, and it's the final piece of her healing. She doesn't need him to understand her pain. She's already moved beyond it. This chapter is a reminder that closure is often something we create for ourselves. Chapter 9. Rediscovering joy with time. I began to rediscover joy in the small things. I traveled, painted, filled my life with colors I hadn't seen in years. Friends became family, and my world grew fuller, richer. It was as though my heart had been closed off for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to experience the world fully, on my own terms. Little by little, I began to trust myself again. One of my favorite rituals became a Saturday morning walk to the local farmer's market. I'd wander through the stalls, breathing in the scent of fresh flowers and baked bread, admiring the vibrant colors of the vegetables and fruits stacked in neat piles. I'd pick up bunches of tulips and place them around my apartment, a small but powerful reminder of the beauty I could create for myself. I filled my space with art, too, pieces that spoke to me, that made me shadow of who I used to be or the relationship that had once defined me. I'd catch myself laughing in the break room, making weekend plans, going out for spontaneous lunches. Work became more than just an escape. It was a community, a place where I could grow without the weight of my history holding me down. As I threw myself into this new world, I also set new goals for myself. I signed up for courses to sharpen my skills, invested time in learning new things, and pushed myself to take on projects that would have intimidated me before. I was stretching, expanding, and with each challenge I overcame, my confidence grew. I realized that I was capable of so much more than I'd ever thought. Of course, there were moments of doubt, times when a familiar sadness would settle in late at night, or when I'd wonder if I was only pretending to be okay. But I learned to sit with those feelings, to let them come and go without letting them consume me. I was beginning to trust that those dark moments were just part of the process, part of the journey towards something brighter. And as I grew in my career, I noticed a change in myself beyond work. I began standing taller, speaking up more, valuing my own voice in a way I never had before. I'd been silent for so long, holding back parts of myself to keep the peace, to fit into the life I'd once shared with someone else. But now, I had no one to silence me, no reason to hold back. I was fully, unapologetically myself. One day, my manager pulled me aside after a presentation and complimented me on my confidence, my insight, my leadership. Her words struck a chord deep within me. I felt proud in a way I hadn't in years. It was as if I was seeing myself clearly for the first time, not as someone's partner, not as a person defined by her past, but as an individual with her own strength, her own story. This job had given me more than a paycheck or a title. It had given me back myself. And with that, I felt ready to face whatever came next, with a courage and resilience that were mine alone. Author's comment: her journey of self-discovery is inspiring. She's no longer defined by her past, but by her own choices. This chapter shows us her strength, her growth, and makes us proud of how far she's come. Chapter 11. Meeting someone new unexpectedly. I met someone new, a kind, thoughtful man who made me laugh. He didn't fill a void. He simply added to my life. We took things slow, savoring each moment, and for the first time, I felt truly at peace. Our first meeting was entirely unplanned. I was at a local bookstore on a Saturday afternoon, flipping through a novel I'd heard good things about. He was standing a few shelves away, studying the same genre, and we exchanged a quick smile when our eyes met. I didn't think much of it, but as I walked away, he followed, casually striking up a conversation about the book I'd chosen. His warm, easygoing nature put me at ease immediately, and I found myself laughing with him about everything from plot twists to our favorite childhood books. His name was Ethan, and there was a calmness about him, a steady energy that felt like a balm to my soul. We exchanged numbers, and for the next few weeks, we met up here and there. Coffee, a museum visit, a long walk in the park where we talked for hours, never once running out of things to say. There were no expectations, no pressure. Just two people enjoying each other's company and learning to trust again. As the weeks turned into months, I realized how much I enjoyed this new chapter of my life. I didn't feel the need to hide parts of myself or rush through anything. I told him about my past in pieces, as it felt natural, and he listened without judgment, only kindness. He had his own story, too. Losses, lessons, moments of heartache, and together, we found a sense of understanding that felt both refreshing and comforting. With Ethan, every moment was honest, uncomplicated. He valued my independence and respected my need to move at my own pace. He didn't try to change me or fix me. He simply shared in my happiness, celebrated my wins, and was there for the small, everyday moments. When I laughed with him, it wasn't just about the joy of the moment. It was about the sense of freedom I felt, knowing I could be completely myself, scars and all. There was one night I'll never forget. We'd been out to dinner, talking about our dreams for the future, our hopes and fears. As we walked back, he took my hand, and I didn't pull away. For the first time in so long, I wasn't afraid of falling or of losing myself again. I felt grounded, whole, ready to love without losing who I'd become. It was as though we were two whole people choosing to walk side by side, both complete, neither one leaning too hard on the other. I realized then that he wasn't just adding to my life. He was helping me see it from a new perspective, one filled with warmth, laughter, and the beauty of genuine companionship. It was a love that respected my past but wasn't defined by it. We were both free to create something new together, something that honored who we were but looked forward to what we could become. With Ethan, I didn't just feel happy. I felt safe. And for the first time in years, I looked forward to the future with a heart that was open, healed, and ready for whatever came next. Author's comment: love finds her again, but this time it's different. It's not about erasing the past. It's about moving forward. This chapter is a reminder that love can be gentle, kind, and healing. Chapter 12. My new beginning. Looking back, I see a journey filled with pain, growth, and resilience. I built a life for myself, one filled with joy, friendship, and peace. My story isn't about betrayal. It's about reclaiming my own strength, about discovering who I am beyond the heartbreak, beyond the life I thought was set in stone. What began as the darkest chapter of my life became the turning point, the place where I learned to rise from the ashes and create something entirely new. In the beginning, it felt like I was stumbling through a maze of grief, anger, and confusion. I had to untangle myself from a future I'd planned around someone else, from memories that no longer felt safe, from dreams that had vanished overnight. But as painful as that unraveling was, each step taught me something about myself, about the resilience I didn't know I had. I learned that while love can break you, it can also rebuild you, in ways that are deeper, wiser, and far stronger than before. The friendships I rebuilt along the way became some of my life's greatest gifts. I reconnected with people who knew me, really knew me, and didn't judge the broken pieces I was carrying. My friends became my chosen family, their love steady and unwavering as I pieced my life back together. They reminded me of who I was before the pain, before the doubts, and they celebrated with me as I discovered who I was becoming. I also grew to love my own company. The quiet weekends spent painting, the solitary trips to places I'd always wanted to see, the mornings I woke up in my small apartment, sunlight streaming in as if to remind me I was exactly where I needed to be. These moments became my anchor. I wasn't lonely. I was free. Free to explore, to laugh, to find beauty in the little things I'd once taken for granted. Yes, there are scars, reminders of the person I once trusted and the life I thought I'd have. But those scars have softened over time, blending into the fabric of my story, no longer sharp or painful. They're simply a part of me, a testament to what I've overcome. I don't hide them, nor do I dwell on them. They're reminders of my strength, of a journey that was as painful as it was necessary. Today, my life isn't perfect, but it's real and it's mine. It's filled with genuine connections, with new dreams, with a peace I've built one day at a time. I've learned to trust again, not blindly, but wisely, with an open heart and clear eyes. I am no longer afraid of loss, because I know now that even in the face of heartbreak, I am capable of standing tall and moving forward. My story isn't one of bitterness or regret. It's one of self-discovery, resilience, and the joy that comes from finding yourself after being lost. I am proud of the woman I've become, a woman who knows her worth, who embraces her past without letting it define her. And as I look to the future, I feel an unwavering sense of hope, a quiet confidence that whatever comes, I will face it with the strength and grace I've fought so hard to reclaim. Author's comment: her story isn't one of defeat, but of triumph. She has transformed her pain into purpose, finding happiness on her own terms. We finish this journey knowing she's not just survived, she's thrived, and that's the true victory.